We are talking about the murder of the DeFeo family in the town of Amityville, in one of the counties of New York State. On November 13, 1974, the eldest son of the family, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo, reported that, upon returning home from work, he found everyone in the household dead. DeFeo's father, mother, 2 sisters and 2 brothers were actually found shot to death in their beds. The police immediately decided that this was the work of the Italian mafia, with which the head of the family had long-standing ties. But 2 days later, an investigator, while examining Ronald's room, discovered a rifle box, which was the murder weapon. Under pressure from the police, the young man began to get confused in his testimony, gave 2 failed versions, but soon admitted his guilt, saying that he drowned the rifle, shell casings and blood-stained clothes in the sewer. Later, the investigation learned that life in DeFeo's house was not easy. The father of many children continually beat his wife and tyrannized his children. The boy grew up aggressive, with a broken psyche, and at the same time, wealthy parents did not refuse him cash and expensive gifts. At the age of 17, Ronald dropped out of school and began to engage in petty thefts and robberies, becoming addicted to drugs and alcohol. Some time before the murder, the guy completely robbed his father of a large sum, simulating a robbery with his friends. The trial of Ronald DeFeo took place almost a year later, in October 1975. The lawyer based his defense on the theory that his client was insanity. The young man allegedly heard voices in his head for 28 days ordering him to kill his relatives. However, experts recognized DeFeo as sane, and the judge determined for him 150 years in prison, 6 terms of 25 years each. However, despite the closure of the case, the investigation could not help but admit that there were still a number of oddities in this terrible story that they could not explain. Why didn't the other family members wake up and run when the killer started shooting at the first victims? Why didn't any of the neighbors hear a dozen shots, even though the rifle was without a silencer? How could a guy, even being armed, single-handedly kill 2 adults and 4 teenagers? These and other questions remain unanswered. Well, the ill-fated house of the DeFeo family was soon bought by the Latz family. In the Amityville house, a multitude of horrifying events unfolded, causing the Lutz family to endure nightmarish nights. Right after moving in, they noticed strange sounds, knocking, shuffling on the floor, and the scraping of walls. These sounds were so intense that the family couldn't sleep. They also reported terrifying visions and apparitions. The mother of the family, Kathy, claimed to have seen the ghost of a man with a white beard appearing to her at various moments. Other family members reported encounters with apparitions, including the children who claimed to have seen a girl with red eyes. Objects moving on their own were another chilling aspect of the ongoing events. Furniture would shift by itself, doors would open and close, and items would fall off shelves. On one occasion, they even witnessed a greenish substance, similar to oil, oozing from the walls. The house was also filled with odors of rot, sulfur, and brackish seawater, even though the surroundings had no connection to these scents. The family felt a constant sense of pressure and aggression within the house. Paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the house and performed a cleansing ritual, but the phenomena continued. The Warrens' investigations made the Amityville house known worldwide and fueled interest in this horrifying story. This is only a small part of the horrors that, according to the claims of the Lutz family and others, took place in the Amityville house. The story remains mysterious and terrifying, and anyone who hears it for the first time remembers this house with its eerie events. Over 3 months in 1965, the family of Gertrude Banaszewski and several other sadistic children tortured 16-year-old Sylvia Likens to death, subjecting her to terrible torture and violence. And this case also became the clearest example of human indifference and indifference. After all, both neighbors and family acquaintances knew about the atrocities in the Banaszewski house, but they preferred to simply mind their own business. However, first things first. Sylvia was born into a large American family. Lester and Elizabeth Likens worked as carnival workers and barely supported 5 children, older twins Diana and Daniel, Sylvia, and younger twins Jenny and Benny. When the boys grew up, their parents began to take them to work, and left Sylvia to look after Jenny. After suffering from polio, she could not move independently. In the summer of 1965, Lester, who had recently left the family, learned that Elizabeth had gone to prison for theft, and that Sylvia and Jenny, who remained in her care, were living with a friend. The man found his daughters in the house of Gertrude Banaszewski, a 36-year-old neurotic woman who did odd jobs and lived with 7 children on the brink of poverty. Likens had no choice but to entrust the girls to Gertrude, asking her to look after them for a fee. At first, everything went peacefully. Sylvia went to school with the owner's eldest daughters, Paula and Stephanie. But a week later, when the woman discovered the delay in payment for her services, she became furious, beat the girls with a stick and subsequently began to do this regularly. Sylvia decided to win Gertrude's favor and told her about Paula's pregnancy. She had previously confided to her friend. But this did not lead to anything good. Paula beat the girl badly, and now all the Banaszewski children were turned against her. Soon, neighboring teenagers joined them, and real persecution began against the unfortunate Likens, which Gertrude only encouraged. But the worst thing is that, under pain of beatings, she forced Jenny to participate in bullying her sister. Either with a bruise, or with a broken lip, the girl was constantly seen by neighbors, the local priest, and even her sister Diana, who came to visit the girls. But no one made any attempt to inform the police or even inquire about Sylvia's fate. Such impunity has completely freed the hands of the scum. Very soon, Gertrude began beating her ward for no apparent reason. The unfortunate girl's kidneys were cut off, and she began to urinate in the bed. Then the sadist locked her in the basement, where completely outrageous things began. Gertrude, for a small fee, allowed the neighboring children to do whatever they wanted with Sylvia. They extinguished cigarette butts on her body, burned inscriptions on her skin, raped her, doused her with boiling water. Sylvia Likens died of shock, brain hemorrhages and malnutrition in October 1965. The trial of her killers became so resonant that it was described in a number of works of fiction, and subsequently in films. Gertrude Banaszewski received a life sentence, but was released through petition in 1985, becoming a devout Christian. The criminal died in 1990 from lung cancer. Paula Banaszewski, after serving her sentence, moved to another state and started a new life. She got married, gave birth to 2 children, and even worked as an assistant to a school psychologist. Spouses Tom and Eileen Lonergan came from the USA to enjoy diving off the coast of the Coral Sea. The couple, having been married for about 10 years by that time, led a very active lifestyle. The Lonergan couple were on a cruise around the world when, in Australia, they decided to dive the famous Great Barrier Reef. On January 25, they boarded the Outer Edge boat and, together with other divers, went to the dive site. Being longtime and experienced divers, the husband and wife refused to be accompanied by an instructor and decided to go down into deep water themselves. After the third dive, the team decided to go back and, having counted all the divers, turned the boat back to the port. As it turned out later, the calculation was made incorrectly, and the Lonergan couple were not on board at the time of departure. This only became known 48 hours later, when the instructor found the couple's belongings on the boat. The alerted police immediately rushed to the hotel, but Tom and Eileen had not appeared there since the fateful date, January 25. The search for the missing continued for about 3 weeks. 17 aircraft, several private small vessels, 2 helicopters were involved, thousands of miles were combed. During the search, various fragments of wetsuits and diving equipment were found, but there was nothing that would indicate the death of the couple. And yet, on February 14, the search was stopped. 6 months later, fishermen found a diving board, with the help of which divers communicate underwater. On it was the following text: Monday, January 26, 1998, 8 o'clock. Anyone who can help us. We were left at Agent Court Reef by the outer edge on January 25, 1998 at 1500 hours. Please save us, send us help before we die. Help. The bodies of Tom and Eileen Lonergan were never found. It is believed that the exhausted couple, in despair, voluntarily went underwater, throwing off the equipment that kept them afloat. Edward Theodore Gein was born in 1906 in Wisconsin. The boy was unlucky with his family from the very beginning. His mother, a devout Lutheran, ran a small grocery store that fed everyone in the household. His alcoholic father was of no use, and his mother showed her contempt for him in every possible way. Mrs. Augusta Gein raised her sons, the eldest Henry and the youngest Ed, in excessive strictness inspired by religious beliefs. The woman protected boys from communicating with their peers, and there was no talk of friendship with girls at all. According to Augusta, all women are completely dissolute creatures, and only sin and lust flourish around them. However, the neighborhood kids did not want to play with Edward. Moreover, they ridiculed him in every possible way for his physical defect. The boy had a skin growth on his left eyelid. Even then, his classmates called him strange. Ed could suddenly laugh in class for no reason. From 1940 to 1945, Edward lost all his loved ones one by one. First, his father died of pneumonia, and a year later, Henry died under strange circumstances. The brothers were burning grass, and suddenly a fire broke out. After extinguishing it, firefighters discovered the body of the elder Jin. The maniac's biographers are still inclined to believe that it was Ed who killed his brother. But then no charges were brought against the young man. All these events crippled Augusta, and in 1945 she died without recovering from a second stroke. Ed, who idolized his mother, was very sad. But he soon found solace in reading, and he gravitated mainly to books on anatomy, and also loved to study sources about Nazi atrocities during the war and reveled in reading obituaries in local newspapers. He earned extra money by looking after his neighbors' children at home. However, for the guys he was harmless, the maniac was much more attracted to the dead. Edward spent more and more time in the cemetery, and then became bolder and began digging up graves, stealing corpses, especially women's. He would later say that he was influenced by the image of his mother. At home, he dismembered trophies, he sewed clothes from scraps of leather, and hung the heads on the walls. But soon the psychopath wanted fresh blood, in 1954, he killed the owner of a local tavern and took her body. In 1957, the owner of a hardware store disappeared. Her son found a pool of blood in the house and a dropped receipt addressed to Edward Gein. The police who arrived at the maniac's house discovered a shocking picture. Gein himself confessed to the murder of 2 women, after which he was declared insane and was placed in a hospital for the criminally insane. The psychopathic necrophiliac lived to a ripe old age and died in July 1984 from cancer.